The Meridian had been floating in the darkness of space for more than 100 years. Nobody remembered it anymore. The great powers of the galaxy, the Valorians, the Kesh, the Xanathi, had all looked at this broken ship and decided it was worthless. Their machines said the ship was dead. Their computers said nothing could be fixed. So they moved on to other things. The Meridian became just another ghost in the endless void, forgotten by everyone. David was a human salvage worker. He was not young anymore, but his hands were still strong and his mind was sharp. He had spent his whole life fixing broken things in space. Other people thought he was crazy because he believed in things that machines could not see. He trusted his hands more than computers. He trusted his instincts more than data. This made other species think humans were primitive, but David did not care what they thought. One morning, David was looking at old salvage reports in his small office. His ship, the Haven, was old and small, but it was his. He found something interesting in the files. A ship called the Meridian. The report said it was completely dead. Every major salvage company had rejected it. Every advanced species had scanned it with their best technology and found nothing worth saving. But David read the coordinates and the description, and something in his chest told him to go look at this ship himself. His crew did not understand his decision. The Valorian trader named Zek shook his head. The Kesh engineer named Porth just stared at David with confusion in his large eyes. "This ship is listed as total loss," Zek said in his clicking voice. "Why would we waste fuel traveling there?" David did not give them a long answer. He simply said, "We go." That was all. David was the captain, so they prepared the Haven for departure. The journey took 3 days. During this time, David thought about the Meridian. He wondered what had happened to it. He wondered why a ship would be left alone for so long. Most salvage operations would have broken it apart for metal and components by now. But something had protected the Meridian. Maybe the location was too remote. Maybe the salvage rights were unclear. Maybe everyone was simply too afraid to waste time on something the computers said was dead. When the Haven finally arrived, the Meridian appeared before them like a ghost. The ship was enormous, much larger than David's small salvage vessel. But it was also broken and dark. No lights shone from its windows. No signals came from its communication systems. The hull was covered with dust and ice from countless years in the cold of space. Pieces of the ship's exterior had broken away, leaving large holes that looked like wounds. Zek scanned the ship with their advanced technology. "Captain, all systems are offline. The power core is completely inactive. The life support has been dead for approximately 107 years. There is no reason to board this vessel. It is waste of time." But David was already checking his space suit. He was already preparing his tools. He had a wrench. He had a scanner that worked on basic principles, not advanced technology. He had lights and cables and spare parts. He had something else too, experience. He had worked on ships since he was a young man. He understood how machines thought. He understood how they broke down. And he understood how they could be brought back to life. "I am going inside," David said quietly. "This is foolish," Porth said. His voice sounded like wind moving through metal. Elena was David's radio operator back at the main station. She was human like him. She knew how David's mind worked. She had heard this tone in his voice many times before. She did not try to stop him. Instead she said, "Be careful, David. Stay in contact." "Always," David replied. David put on his helmet and checked the seals. He attached his safety line. He carried his tools across the void to the Meridian's airlock. The airlock was mechanical and old. It did not have electronic controls anymore. But David found the manual release lever, hidden behind a panel that had almost rusted completely. He pulled it hard. There was a sound like something breaking. Then the airlock door moved. It was slow and difficult, but it moved. David stepped inside. He sealed the door behind him. The Meridian swallowed him into its darkness. His flashlight was the only light now. The beam cut through the thick darkness of the corridors. Everything was silent. Everything was still. The air inside was stale and cold. David could see ice crystals on the walls. He could see dust covering every surface. He could see the signs of a ship that had been dead for a very long time. But as David walked deeper into the Meridian, something happened. Something changed in him. His hands began to tingle. His mind began to work faster. This was not a dead ship. This was a sleeping ship. He could feel it. He could sense it. The machines were dormant, but they were not broken. They were waiting. David made his way to the engine room. It took him 30 minutes of careful walking through dark corridors. When he finally reached the main power core, he understood everything. The core was in a special state, a hibernation mode that the ancient builders had created. It was not a failure. It was a choice. Someone had deliberately put this ship to sleep. David placed his hand on the cold metal of the power core. He closed his eyes. And he began to smile. "Elena," he said into his radio. "I found something. I found something incredible." David stood in the engine room of the Meridian looking at the power core. It was massive and covered in thick layers of mineral deposits. Years of ice and dust had built up on its surface like a second skin. To anyone using advanced scanners, this would look like total failure. The machines would say the core was dead beyond repair. But David saw something different. He saw a machine that was simply sleeping. He saw a puzzle that needed patience to solve. He picked up his tools and began to work. The first thing he did was clean away the ice and mineral buildup. He used a simple tool, not fancy technology but a brush and a cleaning solution he had mixed before coming aboard. He worked slowly and carefully, scraping away layer after layer of frozen material. His hands were steady. His movements were practiced from decades of experience. Elena's voice came through his radio every few minutes. "How are you doing, David? Are you finding anything?" "Just working," David replied. "I need time." Back on the station, Elena watched the data feeds. She could see David's location on the Meridian. She could track his oxygen levels and suit temperature. But she could not see what he was actually doing. She could not feel what he was feeling. She could only trust that David knew something that the machines did not know. Hours passed. David worked without stopping. His hands became tired, but he continued. He removed panel after panel from the power core. Inside he found delicate circuits and connections. Some were damaged, but most were simply corroded. He cleaned each connection with extreme care. He used his basic scanner to test each circuit. One by one he found which connections were broken and which were simply sleeping. Zek and Porth were still aboard the Haven. They watched David's progress through the ship's external sensors. "This human is wasting time," Zek said. His clicking voice showed frustration. "We should leave this place and find real salvage." But Porth was quiet. The Kesh engineer had worked with humans before. He understood something that Zek did not understand. Humans had a way of seeing things that machines could not see. Humans had intuition. Machines only had data. Inside the Meridian, David found the main power distribution system. It was located near the core, protected by multiple layers of shielding. David carefully removed each layer. His fingers moved with precision despite his exhaustion. He found cables that had turned brittle from age. He found switches that had frozen in place. He found components that nobody had touched for more than 100 years. David sat down on the cold floor and looked at what he had uncovered. He thought about all the years the ship had been alone in space. He thought about the builders who had created it. They had built it to last. They had built it with redundancy and protection. They had built it knowing that someday someone might need to restore it. Someone like David. He reached into his bag and pulled out spare cables. These were old technology, simple, reliable, and easy to repair. They were the kind of cables that humans still used because they understood how to work with them. David began replacing the broken cables one by one. As he worked, he hummed an old song. It was something his grandfather had taught him. It was a human song, simple and old. Elena heard him humming through the radio. She smiled. David only hummed when he was confident. When he was focused. When he could feel the solution approaching. After another 3 hours, David was ready. He had cleaned the power core. He had replaced the damaged connections. He had restored the distribution system. He had done everything by hand, using his knowledge and his instincts. Now came the moment of truth. David moved back to the main control panel for the power core. He found the hibernation switch, a large mechanical lever hidden behind a metal plate. Nobody had touched this lever in 107 years. David took a deep breath. His hand reached toward the lever. "Elena, I am about to try something," he said into the radio. "I am here, David," Elena replied. "Be careful." David pulled the lever. Nothing happened immediately. Seconds passed. Then very slowly he heard a sound. It was a humming sound, deep and resonant. The power core was waking up. The hibernation mode was ending. Energy was flowing through the ship for the first time in more than a century. Lights began to flicker on. First one. Then another. Then more and more, spreading through the corridors of the Meridian like a wave of awakening. The ship was alive again. The ship was breathing again. David stood in the middle of the engine room, surrounded by lights and sounds. His hands were shaking, but not from fear. His eyes were wide with wonder. He had done it. His simple approach, his patient hands, his human intuition had succeeded where advanced technology had failed. David, are you okay?" Elena's voice was excited and worried at the same time. I am fine, David said, and his voice was shaking with emotion. The ship is alive, Elena. The Meridian is alive. On the Haven, Zek and Porth stared at their scanners in complete shock. The power readings from the Meridian had changed completely. Systems that had been dead were now active. The ship was no longer a derelict. It was a functioning vessel. This is not possible, Zek whispered. Porth remained silent for a long moment. Then he said something that would echo through the galaxy in the days to come. The human did what our machines could not do. He did what our data said was impossible. He trusted his hands instead of his fear. David moved through the corridors of the Meridian, watching lights come on above his head. Every step he took felt like walking through a dream. This broken, forgotten ship was waking up. And he had done it. Not with advanced technology. Not with superior data analysis. But with the simple, powerful gift that humans possessed. The ability to understand that sometimes, machines just needed someone to believe in them again. David moved carefully through the restored corridors of the Meridian. The lights above his head cast long shadows on the walls. The ship hummed with power now, but it was still mostly empty and silent. He made his way toward the central control room, guided by signs that were still readable after more than 100 years. His heart was beating fast. He could feel that something important was waiting for him. When David reached the control room, he stopped. The room was large and circular, with a massive console in the center. Banks of screens lined the walls. Some screens were already flickering back to life, showing data and symbols that David did not recognize. But he understood something important. This was not just any ship. This was something special. This was something important. David sat down at the main console. His hands moved across the keyboard, pressing buttons that still worked. Elena's voice came through his radio. David, what are you seeing? What is happening? I am accessing the ship's archives, David said slowly. The computer systems are waking up. There is so much data here, Elena. So much information. Back at the station, Elena began to record everything David was doing. She knew this moment was significant. She could feel it in the way David was breathing. She could hear it in the tone of his voice. The screens around David began to show more and more data. Text appeared. Images flickered to life. Charts and diagrams displayed complex information that seemed to come from another world, another time. David's eyes moved across the screens, trying to understand what he was looking at. The data was old, very old. Some of the symbols were unlike anything he had ever seen. But some of the information was clear enough for him to understand the basic meaning. This ship, David said slowly, this is not a cargo vessel. This is a science ship. A research vessel. Look at these symbols. Look at these documents. Elena was already analyzing everything David was sending back to the station. She was recording it all. But she was also stunned by what she was seeing. David, these documents are ancient. They are thousands of years old. How is this possible? David continued to explore the archives. He found more and more data. He found records of experiments. He found mathematical formulas that seemed impossible. He found biological data and physical theories that were so advanced that even Elena, with all her scientific knowledge, could barely understand what she was looking at. Then, suddenly, something happened. A voice came through the Meridian speakers. It was mechanical but also somehow warm. It was calm and ancient and patient. It was the ship's artificial intelligence awakening for the first time in centuries. Welcome, the voice said. Welcome, travelers. I've been sleeping for a long time. But I sense that someone has finally come to restore my vessel. Someone who understands patience. Someone who understands the old ways of working with machines. David felt chills run down his spine. Who are you? He asked. I am the memory keeper of the Meridian, the voice replied. I have waited for this moment for 2,000 years. I have waited for someone who would care enough to wake us up. The AI began to explain. The Meridian had been built by an ancient civilization, a civilization that had disappeared long ago. These builders had been explorers and scientists. They had traveled through space searching for knowledge. They had discovered things that had changed their understanding of the universe itself. But something had happened. The builders had faced a great danger. Or perhaps they had achieved their goal and decided to rest. The Meridian had been placed into deep hibernation as a time capsule. The AI had been instructed to wait. To preserve the knowledge. To wait for someone wise enough and patient enough to find the ship and restore it. You are human, the AI said to David. Your species is young compared to many others. But you possess something that the younger species of your galaxy have forgotten. You possess patience. You possess the willingness to work with your hands. You possess intuition. These are the qualities that built my creator's civilization. Elena's voice came through the radio and she sounded shocked. David, are you hearing this? This is the most important discovery in galactic history. This is a 2,000-year-old ship with information from an extinct civilization. I understand, David said quietly. The AI released more data. Charts and formulas began to appear on the screens. These contained information about physics and mathematics that went far beyond what was currently known in the galaxy. There was information about energy production that could revolutionize how every species powered their ships and cities. There was biological data that could extend lifespans. There was astronomical knowledge that showed star maps of galaxies that had not yet been discovered. Within hours, word spread through the galactic networks. The Valorians heard about the discovery. The Kesh sent urgent messages demanding information. Other species began to take notice. The Meridian was no longer a forgotten derelict. It had become the most valuable object in known space. Back on the station, officials from different governments and organizations began to arrive. They wanted to take control of the ship. They wanted to claim ownership of the archives. They wanted to possess the knowledge for themselves and their own species. But David remained calm. He stayed aboard the Meridian. He continued to work with the AI, learning more about the ancient civilization. He began to understand that this knowledge had been left behind for all species to benefit from. The ancient builders had not hidden their discoveries. They had preserved them because they believed knowledge should be shared. Catherine was a xenoarchaeologist who worked for the Galactic Institute. She saw the data that David was sending back. She understood immediately that this discovery would change everything. This is not just archaeological information, she said in a message to the Galactic Council. This is the foundation of a new age of understanding. The Meridian belongs to all of us, not to any single faction. David sat in the control room of the Meridian, his hand resting on the console. The ship hummed around him. The AI spoke softly. You have awakened us, human. You have given us life again. What will you do now? David thought about the broken ship he had found in the darkness. He thought about his simple tools and his patient hands. He thought about how sometimes, the most powerful thing a person could do was simply to believe that something dead could live again. Now, David said, we share this with everyone. The news of the Meridian's discovery spread through the galaxy like fire. Every major power wanted control of the ship and its ancient knowledge. The Valorians sent their most powerful diplomats. The Kesh assembled their military fleets. The Xanathi demanded seats at the negotiation table. Everyone wanted to own the greatest treasure ever found in recorded history. David received the first official demand just 3 days after awakening the ship's archives. A message came through the communication system, transmitted in the formal language of the Galactic Council. The message was simple and direct. It told David that he must surrender custody of the Meridian to the Council. In return, humanity would receive a payment of 5 billion units of galactic currency. The message said this was final. The message said David had no choice. David read the message twice. Then he deleted it. Elena was shocked when she heard what he had done. David, you cannot ignore the Galactic Council. They are the highest authority in known space. They have the power to arrest you. They have the power to take the ship by force. They can try, David said simply. But first we share the knowledge. David worked through the night. Elena helped him. Catherine helped him from her office at the Institute. Together, they began to release the Meridian's data into the open galactic networks. They did not release it to governments or factions. They released it to scientists. They released it to researchers. They released it to anyone with the knowledge to understand it and the desire to learn. The Valorian representative was angry. His clicking voice filled the communication channels with rage and threats. You are violating galactic law. You are committing an act of theft against all civilizations. We will send ships to take that vessel from you. But something unexpected happened. Scientists from every species began to study the data that David was releasing. They began to see the revolutionary information contained in the Meridian's archives. They began to understand that this knowledge could benefit everyone. A famous Xanathi physicist named Vor-ADH made a public statement. This knowledge belongs to all of us. To hoard it for a single faction would be a crime against science itself. Other scientists agreed. Within days, a movement had begun. Researchers across the galaxy started to demand that the Meridian remain free and open to all species. They formed committees. They created petitions. They spoke to their own governments and demanded that their leaders support David's decision to share the knowledge. The Kesh took a different approach. They sent a military vessel toward the Meridian. It arrived at the ship's location 3 days later. The Kesh commander sent a message. You will surrender the vessel immediately or we will take it by force. This is your final warning. David did not respond with words. Instead, he did something that shocked everyone. He gave the Meridian's AI full control of the ship's defensive systems. The AI had capabilities that nobody in the current galaxy understood. It was ancient technology, far more advanced than anything modern species possessed. The Kesh vessel suddenly found itself surrounded by energy shields and defensive barriers that it could not penetrate. The Kesh commander tried to attack, but the Meridian's defenses were too strong. The military vessel was forced to retreat. News of this encounter spread rapidly. Everyone understood the message. The Meridian could not be taken by force. The Galactic Council held an emergency session. David attended by video feed from the Meridian. He appeared on the central screen, standing calmly in the control room of the ancient ship. The council representatives stared at him with a mixture of anger and confusion. They were not used to being challenged. They were not used to humans saying no. You are defying the authority of this council, said the Valorian representative. I am protecting knowledge that belongs to all of us, David replied. His voice was steady and calm. The ancient builders of this ship wanted their discoveries to be shared. They built this ship as a time capsule for the entire galaxy. Not for any single faction. Not for any government. For all of us. Dr. Robert, the human representative on the Galactic Council, stood up and spoke. I support David's decision. Humanity will not surrender the Meridian. We will continue to share its knowledge freely with every species that wishes to learn. This was unexpected. The Council had assumed that humanity's government would pressure David to cooperate. But instead, the human representative was supporting him. The balance of power was shifting. Catherine made a powerful speech at the Institute. She said, the Meridian represents a bridge between civilizations separated by thousands of years. To claim it for ourselves would be to betray everything that science stands for. Knowledge is meant to be shared. Truth is meant to be discovered by all. More and more scientists and leaders began to speak out in support of David. They realized that the Meridian represented something more important than politics or power. It represented the future of galactic civilization. After 2 weeks of intense debate and negotiation, the Galactic Council made an announcement. They could not force David to surrender the Meridian. The ancient ship's defenses were too powerful. The public support for sharing its knowledge was too strong. The Council had no choice but to accept David's terms. The Council officially recognized the Meridian as neutral territory. They granted humanity custodianship of the ship and its archives, with the understanding that all knowledge would be shared freely with any species that requested it. In exchange, humanity would receive representation and resources from every major faction. It was a victory for David. It was a victory for humanity. But more importantly, it was a victory for knowledge itself. Elena and Catherine came to the Meridian in person to celebrate with David. They stood together in the control room, looking at the screens that displayed all the ancient knowledge they had awakened. David placed his hand on the console, and the AI's voice spoke one more time. Thank you, human, the voice said. You have given my creator's knowledge back to the galaxy. You have shown that patience and principle are stronger than power and force. Your species may be young, but you understand something important. You understand that the greatest strength is in sharing, not in taking. David smiled. He had come to the Meridian as a salvage worker. He was leaving as something more. He was leaving as a guardian of knowledge. He was leaving as proof that humans had a place among the greatest civilizations in the galaxy. The Meridian had been transformed into a research station. Scientists from every species in the galaxy came to work aboard the ancient ship. Valorians studied the physics data. Kesh engineers examined the mechanical designs. Xanathi biologists reviewed the biological discoveries. Humans like David, Elena, and Catherine worked alongside them, sharing knowledge and learning from one another. 6 months had passed since the Galactic Council had officially recognized humanity's custodianship of the ship. 6 months of hard work. 6 months of discovery. 6 months of change that would affect every civilization in known space. David remained as the chief engineer of the Meridian. It was a responsibility that he took seriously. He walked through the corridors of the ancient ship every day, ensuring that all systems were functioning properly. He trained other engineers in the old ways of working with machines, the ways that humans understood instinctively. Many aliens were surprised to discover that manual work and intuition could solve problems that their advanced computers could not solve. Elena had become the operations director of the research station. She managed the complex schedules of hundreds of scientists. She coordinated research projects. She made sure that knowledge was being shared fairly among all species. She was good at her job because she understood both human perspective and alien perspectives. Catherine led the archaeological team. She was studying the Meridian's archives more deeply than anyone else. She had discovered documents that described the ancient builders' entire history. She had found records of their greatest achievements and their greatest failures. She was writing a comprehensive history of a civilization that had disappeared 2,000 years ago. But the most important changes were not happening aboard the Meridian. The most important changes were happening in the wider galaxy. The knowledge from the Meridian's archives was revolutionizing every field of science and technology. Engineers were building new ships using the ancient designs. Doctors were extending lifespans using biological information that had been preserved for millennia. Physicists were developing new energy sources that could power entire star systems. The advancement of galactic civilization was accelerating at a rate that nobody had ever predicted. Universities across the galaxy began to teach courses based on the Meridian's knowledge. Young aliens came to the research station to study under David, Elena, and Catherine. A Valorian student named Shri spent 3 months learning David's approach to mechanical problem-solving. She went back to her home world and began teaching other Valorians that patience and intuition were just as important as advanced technology. Akesh named Porth, the same engineer who had worked with David from the beginning, became a bridge between human and alien understanding. He traveled to different planets, showing other engineers how humans approach challenges. He became an unexpected ambassador for humanity, proving that primitive methods could produce extraordinary results. But not everyone was happy about these changes. Some conservative factions in the Galactic Council resisted the sharing of knowledge. Some powerful species felt threatened by humanity's sudden rise in importance. There were whispers of rebellion. There were threats of war. The unity that had formed around the Meridian was fragile and could shatter at any moment. Then something happened that changed everything again. A message arrived at the Meridian from the deepest parts of space. It was a signal from another ancient ship, a sister ship to the Meridian. It was located far beyond current galactic territory, in regions that no modern civilization had explored. The signal was weak, but it was definitely there. And it was definitely calling for help. David received the message in the control room. The Meridian's AI spoke to him directly. There is another like me lost in the darkness. Another repository of ancient knowledge. Another bridge between civilizations. But it is dying. Its power core is failing. Without assistance it will be lost forever. David understood what this meant. The discovery of a second ancient ship would require cooperation between all species. It would require sending an expedition into dangerous, unexplored territory. It would require trust and unity at a level that the galaxy had never achieved before. He called an emergency meeting of the Galactic Council. This time the meeting was different. Scientists and leaders argued passionately for the expedition. Even the conservative factions understood that this was an opportunity too important to miss. They agreed to send a joint mission, a crew composed of members from every major species, with David as the expedition leader. 3 weeks later, David stood on the bridge of a ship that had been specially built to carry the expedition. The crew included Valorians, Kesh, Xanathi, and humans. They worked together as one unified force. They were heading toward unknown space to find a ship that had been lost for 2,000 years. As the ship prepared for departure, David received a message from Dr. Robert, the human representative on the Galactic Council. The message was simple. It said, "You have already changed our world once, David. Now you are about to change it again. Thank you for believing in what others had given up on." Elena and Catherine came to see David before he left. They embraced him in the corridor of the Meridian. "Be careful out there," Elena said. "Come back to us." "I will," David promised. Before David boarded the expedition ship, he walked through the Meridian one final time. He walked through the corridors where he had first restored power. He walked through the control room where he had awakened the AI. He placed his hand on the ancient console, feeling the vibration of the ship's systems beneath his palm. The AI spoke to him one more time. "You have opened a new era for all of us, human. You have shown that age does not matter. That species does not matter. That the only thing that matters is the willingness to reach out and understand one another. Go now. Find my sister. Bring her knowledge back to the galaxy. And know that you carry with you the hopes of every civilization in this corner of space." David nodded. He turned and walked toward the waiting expedition ship. Behind him, the Meridian shone with brilliant lights, a beacon of knowledge and unity in the darkness of space. The expedition ship engaged its engines. It moved away from the station. It moved away from the safety of known space. It moved toward discovery and adventure and the promise of a new era. An era where a single human mechanic had proven that the greatest technology in the universe was not found in machines. It was found in the human heart. It was found in the refusal to give up. It was found in the belief that anything was possible if you were willing to work hard enough and trust deeply enough. The ship disappeared into the distance, carrying humanity's representative toward the unknown, toward the future, toward a destiny that nobody could predict but everyone believed in.